Ready for the World, one of the most iconic R&B groups of the 80s, with chart-topping hits and smooth grooves that made you fall in love with their sound. But what if I told you their rise to fame wasn't all it seemed? What if their success was built on a lie, manipulated by a system that didn't care about them at all? Melvin Riley, the face of the group, is now exposing everything 40 years later. They weren't the overnight success story we thought. No, they were just another group used by the industry, their success stolen and their true legacy hidden in the shadows. Let's talk about what really happened and why their story was never the one we were told. Ready for the World story was always one of glitz, glamour, and smooth R&B hits that made us all groove. Melvin Riley and his crew burst onto the scene in the mid-80s with Oh Sheila, a song that dominated the charts and had everyone, including the ladies, captivated. They were the new R&B sensation, smooth as silk and just edgy enough to keep people intrigued. But that's where the story takes a turn. The public perception of Ready for the World has always been that they were the ones in control, that they were the architects of their own success. But the truth? Not so much. Sure, they were the faces of the group. But did they have any say in their direction? Did they call the shots? Or were they just another product of the music industry machine? Behind the polished exterior, there was something much darker brewing. This wasn't the story of a group that made it big and lived the dream. It was the story of a group that was handed a dream, only to have it yanked away when they realized they didn't have the power to hold on to it. They were sold a false narrative, a fantasy of success and fame that wasn't as real as they thought. So where did this misconception come from? How did we all get tricked into believing Ready for the World was living the high life when, in reality, they were struggling in ways no one saw? It all starts with their label, because that's where the truth starts to unravel. The label created the illusion of success, pushed them to the top, and then pulled the rug out from under them when it suited their own agenda. Ready for the World was supposed to be a success story, a shining example of talent meeting opportunity. But in reality, they were victims of an industry that saw them as nothing more than a commodity to exploit. And what did they get in return for their hit records and chart-topping success? A life full of mismanagement, broken promises, and a group that was slowly falling apart. It wasn't the rise to fame people thought it was. It was the beginning of a carefully orchestrated facade that would eventually crack. And Melvin Riley, decades later, is finally ready to tell us exactly what went wrong. Here's the truth that no one wanted to hear. Ready for the World was never supposed to succeed, not the way we thought they did. The group was pushed to the top, but they weren't in control of their success. They were manipulated by their label, and all that glitz and glam were built on a shaky foundation that was destined to crumble. Think about it. Oh Sheila was a monster hit, right? It wasn't just a song, it was an anthem. But here's the thing. That song, that success, it didn't make the members of Ready for the World rich. In fact, it did the opposite. While they were busy living the high life, performing on TV shows, and basking in their newfound fame, the record label was cashing in on their backs. They were promised fame and fortune, but behind the scenes, they were getting pennies on the dollar. The label manipulated their image, made promises that were never kept, and controlled every aspect of their career. The group members were pushed to create hit after hit, but the profits were going somewhere else, straight into the pockets of the label execs. They were the ones who got rich off Ready for the World's name, while the band struggled to get what they deserve. And when you're constantly performing, creating, and living under the shadow of someone else's control, it's hard to see how deep the manipulation runs. But this wasn't just about money, it was personal. The members of Ready for the World were sold a fantasy, an illusion that everything was as it seemed. They were led to believe that their success was a result of their talent and hard work, when in reality, they were just a cog in a machine designed to make other people rich. And the worst part? They had no way to break free from it. So, while the world saw them as R&B royalty, what they were really dealing with was something much darker. An industry that chewed them up and spit them out. Their fame was a trap, and they were stuck in it, unable to escape the very system that made them famous in the first place. Ready for the World was supposed to be a success story, but in reality, it was a cautionary tale of how the industry can build you up, only to tear you down when it no longer needs you. And Melvin Riley, he's been holding on to this truth for decades, but now he's finally ready to expose it. The story you thought you knew? It's time to throw that out the window because the real story is even more shocking than you can imagine. Now let's take a deeper dive into just how deep the rabbit hole really goes. We've already seen that Ready for the World's success was more illusion than reality, but what about the sacrifices they made? Emotionally, mentally, and professionally. How much of their true story was hidden beneath the surface, behind the bright lights and the catchy tunes? The truth is, what people didn't see were the constant battles behind the scene. Battles that weren't just with the label, but within the group itself. When you're thrust into the spotlight as quickly as Ready for the World was, it's easy to get lost in the whirlwind of fame. You start off thinking you're living the dream, touring, performing, and getting recognition. But all that attention starts to take a toll, and before long, the pressure to stay on top starts breaking the group apart. You see, the stress of being controlled, mismanaged, and constantly hustled for hits took its toll on the members. They weren't just fighting a corporate machine, they were fighting each other. But here's where things get even murkier. Many of the tensions within the group weren't just personal conflicts, they were rooted in the way the label set them up for failure. Ready for the World was made to work under impossible conditions, grueling schedules, creative differences that were never addressed, and a constant fight for recognition. While the label reaped all the rewards, the group members were left scrambling, trying to hold on to the scraps of their own careers. But as the cracks started to show, the group splintered. Members left and others burned out, realizing that they had been sold a dream that was never theirs to begin with. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Did the label and the industry want to see the group fail? Maybe not outright, but it sure seems like they didn't do much to prevent it. They built up Ready for the World just to break them down once they hit their peak. It wasn't about nurturing talent. It was about squeezing every ounce of success out of them until they were dry. And when the group began to show signs of breaking, the label dropped them like a bad habit. The most surprising part? It wasn't just the group's downfall that was orchestrated. It was the way the industry allowed them to believe that their success was their success. They were encouraged to keep pushing, keep creating, and keep performing, all while the real decision makers were calling the shots from behind the curtain. The group was stuck in a system where they had no power, no control, and no real say in their own future. And by the time they realized it, they were too far gone to regain what they had lost. So, what's the real takeaway here? Ready for the World wasn't just a group that faced bad luck. They were victims of an industry that played them like puppets. And even though they had the talent to go the distance, the music industry wasn't interested in letting them keep that success for themselves. All right, let's dig even deeper into the web of manipulation and mismanagement that Ready for the World was tangled in. We've already talked about the label's role in exploiting them, but let's look at how this affected the group on a personal level. Not only was the financial side of their careers a mess, but the emotional toll it took on each member is something people rarely talk about. For one, there was constant pressure to maintain a certain image, an image that was being manufactured by their label. Ready for the World was marketed as the epitome of cool, smooth R&B with a fresh, sexy vibe. But how much of that was actually their vision? How much of it was controlled and curated by an industry that just wanted to sell records? The members, especially Melvin Riley, were forced into molds that didn't always fit them. And when the image started to crack under the pressure, it wasn't the label taking the fall, it was the group. Let's take a closer look at how this image played out in the music. Oh Sheila, probably their biggest hit, was the song that solidified Ready for the World's place in R&B history. But did the members really get to steer the creative direction of that song? Did they get to decide the sound, the lyrics, or the production? Not really. While Riley and the guys certainly brought their talents to the table, the label had a heavy hand in shaping everything. From the beats to the look, the group was more of a vessel for the label's ideas than the driving force behind their own music. But here's where the cracks began to show. As Ready for the World's success grew, the group started to see how limited their power really was. They weren't making the money they thought they would, and worse, they weren't even in control of their own narrative. While they were out there touring, making appearances, and performing for fans, their earnings were being siphoned off by the label and management, leaving them with little to show for all their hard work. And by the time they started to push back, it was too late. The turning point came when members started to leave the group, citing the constant strain and internal conflict. But let's be real here. This wasn't just a case of creative differences. This was a direct result of the way the label handled their careers. The personal and professional pressures, the internal tensions, and the lack of financial rewards left the group fragmented. They couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when the industry had drained them dry and wasn't giving them the recognition they deserved. What's even crazier is how much of this was swept under the rug for years. Even though Riley has finally come forward to expose the truth, the general public still doesn't know just how bad it got behind the scenes. The way the group was controlled by their label isn't just a small oversight. It's the entire reason they never reached the heights they were capable of. Ready for the World could have had a much longer, more successful career if they hadn't been puppets in a game they didn't even know they were playing. And let's not forget about the aftermath of all this. When the group split up, some members tried to go solo, but they quickly realized that they didn't have the power to make it on their own either. The industry had already moved on, and with no real financial support or backing, those solo careers fizzled out almost as quickly as they started. Ready for the World, once at the height of R&B, became a footnote in the genre's history. A group with so much potential, but lost in a system that didn't care about their future. Ready for the World wasn't just the victim of bad luck, they were the victims of an industry that chewed them up, spit them out, and left them to figure it out on their own. Let's take this even further, because the truth about Ready for the World's downfall is even more layered than we've already discussed. While we've talked about the label's manipulation and the internal struggles within the group, there's one crucial factor we haven't fully explored: the emotional toll and the personal sacrifices that the members made just to keep their careers alive. Behind all those chart-topping hits, what was really going on? Well, the members of Ready for the World were sacrificing more than just their time. They were sacrificing their mental health and personal lives, all for the sake of a career that was being manipulated by their label. The pressure to meet expectations, stay relevant, and continuously pump out hits took a toll that no one saw coming. And as the band members were pushed harder and harder by the label, the very foundation of their friendship and bond began to crumble. Let's talk about how that pressure affected Melvin Riley, the frontman. Riley, who was the face of Ready for the World, found himself struggling under the weight of the group's success. In interviews, Riley has admitted that the constant grind, coupled with the lack of financial compensation, left him burned out and questioning his role in the group. He was the one holding everything together, but he wasn't reaping the rewards. In fact, he was often the one trying to hold it together when the cracks were showing. The emotional burnout was real, and yet the world only saw Riley as the charismatic leader of a successful group. And then there's the reality of their disbandment. This wasn't a clean breakup or even a simple falling out. No, the end of Ready for the World was the direct result of a series of bad decisions, both personal and professional, made by the label and the group members themselves. The emotional toll of constant mismanagement, on top of losing their financial footing, made it impossible for the group to continue. Some of the members, fed up with the industry's broken promises, simply walked away. And those who stayed, they realized they were stuck in a system that had already failed them once. The public thought the band just faded out of the spotlight, but in reality, they were fighting to stay afloat. Their breakup wasn't just about creative differences. It was about the realization that the industry had taken everything they had, and there was nothing left to give. Let's also consider how the group was never fully able to get back on track. After the group's success, many of the members tried to go solo, but none of their careers took off the way Ready for the World did. They didn't have the label's support anymore, and without the label pushing them, the music industry quickly moved on. While some of the group members sought solo careers, they were left fighting for relevance in a world that had moved past them. The industry never gave them the space to truly flourish beyond their early hits. And then there's the financial fallout. Melvin Riley may have been the face of the group, but even he was left scrambling for money after Ready for the World fell apart. The group's lack of royalties, along with their inability to regain control of their career, left many of them in tough financial situations. But they weren't alone. Every member of the group faced the same struggles, from missed opportunities to a complete lack of ownership over their music. When the label's control ended, so did their financial support. Riley has even stated in interviews that it took him years to recover from the fallout of Ready for the World's disbandment. He never fully bounced back, and that's a reality many fans don't see. So, while Ready for the World's story might seem like just another tragic tale of fading fame, it's actually a cautionary tale about how the music industry exploits its stars, especially those who don't have the power or knowledge to fight back. What the public saw as a simple collapse of a group was actually the result of years of emotional, financial, and personal strain that ultimately destroyed what could have been a lasting legacy. Ready for the World didn't fade out because they lost their talent. They were robbed of the opportunity to truly control their own future. And as much as we remember their hits today, we often forget the price they paid for them. Now that we've explored the deeper, more personal toll Ready for the World paid for their so-called success, let's focus on how their legacy, or lack thereof, has been handled over the years. It's easy to remember Oh Sheila and think of them as one-hit wonders, but their story deserves more than that. What happened to them after the hits faded and the spotlight moved on? One of the biggest missed opportunities was the group's failure to capitalize on their success. Sure, Oh Sheila was a massive hit, but Ready for the World never really followed it up with a comparable breakthrough. Their subsequent albums and singles struggled to make the same impact. But what fans don't know is that the group had the potential for so much more, if only the industry had given them the support they needed. The label didn't have any interest in supporting the group long-term, especially after they failed to replicate that initial success. And as time went on, the members of Ready for the World found themselves scrambling to figure out what went wrong. But with no real backing and no financial freedom, their comeback efforts were doomed to fail. The group's legacy became nothing more than a cautionary tale of what happens when the industry treats artists like disposable commodities. Let's talk about the solo careers. After Ready for the World fell apart, some members did try to branch out on their own. Melvin Riley, for instance, attempted a solo career, but the support he needed just wasn't there. His solo albums didn't gain the traction that his work with Ready for the World had, and without the label pushing him, he struggled to regain any kind of mainstream success. The industry that had once supported him now seemed indifferent to his talent, and his solo projects were largely ignored. The other members faced similar challenges. None of them really had a shot at re-entering the spotlight without the label's support that made Ready for the World famous. Despite their talent, they were overshadowed by newer acts and forgotten by an industry that quickly moved on to the next big thing. What's even more frustrating is that, at the time, there were still plenty of R&B artists who were breaking through and achieving success. But Ready for the World was left behind, not because they lacked talent, but because the industry didn't have a place for them anymore. As for their net worth, well, let's just say it's not what most people would expect for a group that was once at the top. Even after the success of their biggest hit, Ready for the World struggled financially for years. The band members never really reaped the rewards of their success, and their earnings were stifled by the control their label held over them. In fact, many of the members of Ready for the World have reportedly faced financial difficulties well into the 2000s and beyond. They made money when they were hot, but once the hits dried up, so did the cash flow. They didn't have the luxury of owning their music, and when the industry moved on from them, so did their financial security. The harsh reality is that they were used as pawns in a game that never had their best interests at heart. And while some members managed to stay afloat through side projects or occasional performances, Ready for the World's legacy in 2025 isn't as financially secure as many fans would believe. But perhaps the most devastating part of all of this is the lack of recognition. While other artists from the 80s and 90s have been revisited and given the recognition they deserve, Ready for the World remains a distant memory for most. Despite their influence on R&B, especially in the 80s, the group never got the chance to reclaim their rightful place in music history. Riley's Exposé may shed light on what went wrong, but it doesn't change the fact that the world has largely forgotten them. Ready for the World deserved more. They deserved a chance to flourish on their own terms, with the support and respect they had earned. But the industry's cold and calculating nature left them as nothing more than a footnote in the larger narrative of R&B history. Their tragic end isn't just a result of fading popularity, it's the result of an industry that failed them at every turn. In 2025, where are they now? Well, while Riley and some of the other members are still alive and kicking, trying to maintain their music careers in whatever form they can, the world doesn't remember them the way they should. Their music is relegated to nostalgia playlists and classic R&B radio stations, and that's about it. They're often dismissed as a product of their time, without the recognition they deserve for their contributions to the genre. And let's not forget that Melvin Riley's Exposé is his attempt to finally correct that. He's telling the truth because someone needs to, and perhaps, just maybe, It'll help people realize that Ready for the World story is far more complicated and far more tragic than anyone ever thought. So, what's the real story behind Ready for the World? They weren't just another group that faded into obscurity. They were victims of an industry that used them, drained them, and discarded them when they no longer served a purpose. Their rise to fame wasn't as glorious as we thought, and their fall wasn't as simple as losing relevance. It was a series of missteps, manipulations, and broken promises that left them fighting for survival in an unforgiving industry. Melvin Riley's Exposé might have come decades later, but it's a reminder of the harsh truth behind the glitz and glam of the music business. Ready for the World's legacy is not just about Oh Sheila and their few hits. It's about how the industry took everything from them, from their money to their autonomy. And now, 40 years later, Riley's words are helping us see the story in a new light. Not just as a cautionary tale, but as a lesson in how even the most talented can get caught in the web of exploitation. As much as we remember their music, let's not forget the people behind it. Ready for the World deserves to be remembered not only for their hits, but for their struggle, their pain, and their resilience in the face of an industry that didn't care about their well-being. So the next time you hear Oh Sheila, think about what came with it, the price that was paid for those sweet melodies. Thanks for watching, and remember, there's always more to the story than what you see on the surface.